Welcome back to the Sunday Serving channel. The place you come every week for hope, for inspiration, a word from the gospel, and now with this new format, maybe start out with a question. Some pressing question about life, hopefully something that you have. Please drop a comment at the bottom of these videos and ask your questions. So this weekend, our whole country is celebrating Memorial Day. And that's interesting to reflect on. What is the meaning of Memorial Day? It's a day of remembrance, to remember all those men and women who have given up their lives, have died fighting for our country in wars, laying down their lives in a war, serving their country, serving others. So it's a day set aside to remember them and their sacrifice. And I think it's important to remember. And many times in the Bible, God told us to remember things like remember Sabbath, the day that He rested after creating the world. To remember God's laws. So to remember those who have laid down their lives, that's very important. And it begs a question, I think, that I've heard that has been asked of me. What do you think of this? What are you willing to die for? That's an appropriate question for today. What am I willing to die for? Is it my family? Is it my friends? My country? Serving God? Am I willing to die for Jesus? That's a deep question. I think it's difficult for any of us to answer that and say, yes, I'm going to die for this, or I'm willing to die for that. And I think it's very connected to another important question: what am I living for? Not what I'm willing to live for, but what am I actually living for? Because those two things have to be connected. If I really live for what I believe, I should be ready to die for it. You can't actually live. There's a famous civil rights activist, I forget his name, it wasn't Martin Luther King, one of the others said, I can't really begin to live until I know what I'm willing to die for. And of course, for any of us that believe in Jesus and following His commandments, the greatest example is there, that Jesus lived for love. He lived to save the world, and He was willing to die for that. He did die for that. God asked Him for that sacrifice, to die as a man, as a Son of Man, God's Son, for us, for our sins, so that we may live, so that we may be free, so that we may be free of fear of death, sin, and torment, and all those things. That's why Jesus was willing to die, because He was willing to live. So what are some passages that might be, good in answering that question? What am I willing to die for? What am I living for? There's a passage in Luke that I think speaks to this, especially the second part, because I think that's so important to concentrate on that. What am I living for? So this is Jesus, the 12th chapter of Luke, starting at verse 32. He says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." So again, don't be afraid. God is pleased. He wants to give us His kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, where everything is just and righteous and beautiful. The Father's been pleased to give you the kingdom. But then He goes right on, and this is a difficult commandment here. It says, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys." So that's a challenge. That's a commandment from God, to take care of the poor. It says, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Is that something that I'm living for or willing to die for? And why? To provide purses in heaven where thieves can't steal and moths don't destroy. And then Jesus ends with this very important word: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. So this is the context of it, but that can apply in so many ways. I think it informs us in what we're living for. We all get caught up in life and things, and many of them are very good things. We can get caught up in serving ourselves and building up wealth and doing good things for our family and in our churches, in our schools, in sports programs, and all kinds of great things. And we have to always prioritize, what are we really living for? What is our treasure? And where our treasure is, what we value most in this life, there's our heart. And if that is something worthy, we should be willing to die for it. Is it God? Is it Jesus? Is it following the greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's try to tie those two things together, of really living for our treasure and finding that true treasure, which should be loving God, following Jesus' commandments, and loving our neighbor. And if we really do that, we will be willing to die for it, but we won't have fear. It won't be a morose thing. In fact, I want to read a couple more passages here from some of the letters of Paul that talk about this. Philippians 1, I love this little line here, chapter 1, verse 21, for me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. That's what Paul said. So living is joy. It's living for Christ. And if I die in the cause of working for God, it is gain. Or Romans 14. Here's a great passage, chapter 14, starting at verse 7. For none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us die for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. So that's the unity of life. Let's live for the Lord and be ready to die for the Lord. Whether we live or die doesn't really matter in the end. We're living for the Lord. For this very reason, Christ died and returned to life, so that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. So let's reflect on these themes. What am I living for? What are you living for? What am I willing to die for in that living? And let's thank God for all those who have laid down their lives for others, whether they be soldiers on a battlefield or people that stood up for their faith, martyrs, like Jesus did. He died because he was the Son of God. And many people have died throughout history proclaiming Jesus as their Lord. In the early church, going on from there, in the Reformation times, you can think of many, like Hans and Sophie Scholl for the Nazis. They died because they stuck up for truth. There were 21 Coptic believers who followed Jesus who died at the hands of their assassins. There's a wonderful book about that. There's so many others. And you never know. There's law enforcement people that are willing to die for others as they rush to save children. We have these tragic school shootings. So many things going on. Let's live for love. And what that really means is I'm willing to die for it if I believe in what I'm living for. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful week. I hope you have a good weekend. And take care. We'll see you next week. Come on, Remy. Remy's really all fired up for what she's living for. Come on, Remy.